The story begins with a little girl sitting on a swing, gently swaying back and forth. This child was Rai, Lin Fang's daughter. She was lost in thought as she spoke to her father, telling him that her teacher had asked why he didn't come to the school meeting. Of course, the teacher didn't know the real reason. Her father, once a mighty warrior, was now stuck in a wheelchair, unable to move. Rai had proudly told them that he was an ancient god of war, but it didn't change the fact that he couldn't protect them anymore. Because of this, she was bullied by other children, and her mother was constantly teased as well. At night, Rai often caught her mother crying in secret, pretending not to notice. But deep inside, she desperately wished for her father to wake up and protect them. Lin Fang saw the sadness in his daughter's eyes. He could feel the pain she was going through, and it tore him apart. But before he could think more about it, a boy appeared next to Rai, looking at her with a smug expression. He laughed and pointed at her. "Crying again?" he sneered. Rai didn't want to leave the swing, but the boy, Zhou Xiao, looked at her with disgust and started spreading nasty rumors. He claimed that her mother had taken advantage of a crippled man and was living off of him. His words were cruel, completely false, but they still made Rai's blood boil. Unable to hold back her anger, she jumped off the swing and stormed up to him. "If you dare insult my parents again, you'll regret it," she shouted furiously. Xiao simply smirked. Without a moment of hesitation, he shoved her to the ground. Since he was much bigger than Rai, the push was hard. She lost her balance and fell back, hitting her head against the swing. The pain shot through her, but Xiao wasn't done yet. He laughed at her misery, enjoying the sight of her on the ground. Then, as if to add insult to injury, he spat on her. Rai clenched the grass in her hands, seething with rage, but she felt completely powerless. Xiao smirked. "You're just a little animal." That was the last straw. Rai couldn't take it anymore. She lunged forward and bit his hand as hard as she could. Xiao let out a scream, yanking his arm back. But before Rai could react, a woman came running toward them, Xiao's mother. Seeing her son being attacked, she didn't hesitate. She kicked Rai, sending her tumbling backward. "You wild little brute," the woman snapped. "Did your parents never teach you any manners?" Rai looked up at the woman, stunned by how cruel she was. This woman wasn't just condoning her son's behavior, she was worse than him. Then, without warning, the woman grabbed Rai and dragged her toward Xiao. The little girl struggled, but the woman was too strong. "Apologize," she barked. "Kneel down and say you're sorry." Lin Fang sat in his wheelchair, watching everything unfold. His internal energy began to boil. Fury burned through him like fire. His daughter had done nothing wrong, and yet she was being treated like this. He clenched his fists, his heart pounding with rage. Rai, on the other hand, was confused. Why should she apologize? Xiao was the one who insulted her family first. She wasn't going to bow down to him. Seeing her resistance, another person stepped in, Xiao's father. The man grabbed Rai by her ponytail and pulled hard, forcing her to face him. "You better apologize," he ordered coldly. Rai refused. Even though she was outmatched, she wouldn't back down. Her defiance only made things worse. Xiao's mother suddenly slapped her across the face. "You filthy little brat," she sneered. "Are you really sure you want to keep resisting?" Rai's cheek stung from the slap, but she refused to break. Even though she knew she was just a child against two grown adults, she wasn't going to give in. Xiao's father raised his hand again, this time ready to strike even harder. But before his palm could make contact, his hand was stopped. Lin Fang had moved. The entire scene froze. Everyone's eyes widened in shock. Lin Fang held the man's wrist in a tight grip, his voice deep and full of fury. "How dare you lay a hand on my daughter?" Zhao's father, who had been so sure of his dominance just moments ago, suddenly felt a wave of fear wash over him. The air around Lin Fang changed. The pressure was suffocating. At that moment, Lin Fang declared something that sent chills down everyone's spine. "From now on, anyone who touches my daughter will lose their head." Xiao's father tried to struggle, but Lin Fang pinned him to the ground in an instant. Xiao and his mother could only watch in horror, frozen with fear. The woman finally snapped out of it. She rushed forward and started hitting Lin Fang, screaming at him to let go of her husband. "Don't you dare touch him! I'll call the police!" she shrieked. Lin Fang didn't even let her finish. He slapped her, sending her flying back onto the grass. She lay there stunned. You dared to hit my daughter first, he reminded her coldly. His rage was boiling over. He glared at them. Remember this day. I let you live once. It won't happen again. At that moment, memories of his past battles flooded Lin Fang's mind. He had fought alone against thousands, standing strong despite his wounds. Even then, he had never given up. Back in the present, Rai clung to his legs, her voice shaking. Dad, is it really you? Lin Fang's gaze softened. He lifted his daughter into his arms, holding her close. Then he turned back to Xiao's family. Bow 100 times and apologize, or I'll wipe out your entire bloodline. Fearing for their lives, they immediately dropped to their knees, bowing over and over, apologizing frantically. Rai, still crying, whispered, Dad, everyone hates you. Lin Fang stroked her head gently. No one will hurt us anymore. But Rai had something else to say. No one believes me when I tell them you're a hero. Lin Fang sighed, then noticed her bruises. His rage returned. He had to wake up completely. He had to protect them. Sensing his emotions, Rai asked him to let her down. He did so gently. Then she whispered something shocking. Grandma kicked us out of the house. She said Mom has to talk to Uncle's son. Lin Fang's expression darkened. Rai leaned in and whispered, Pretend to be asleep. Lin Fang smirked at his daughter's cleverness. He slumped back into his wheelchair. As soon as he did, Rai started shouting, Dad fainted. It's all your fault. Panic set in. Xiao's family turned pale, terrified they'd be blamed. Later, when Lin and Rai returned home, they were met with hostility. Rai's grandmother stood in the hallway, furious to see them. You're not welcome here, she spat.